Hi, 7th graders. If you are in Group A, you'll go ahead and just fast forward to the time I have posted for you in Google Classroom. If you are in Group B, unfortunately, you're here for the long haul. I'm going to try to go through this as fast as I can. I encourage you to have your notes out. If you don't have your packet, you're going to at least want to have a piece of notebook paper to jot some stuff down onto. Excuse me. So last week we talked about the Battle of Fort Sumter and the first Battle of Bull Run. Both events happen within 3 months' time. The first happens in April of 1861, and then again in July of 1861. Both events will be won by the South, who are essentially considered the underdogs in the American Civil War. This puts the South off to a good start. They have a lot of confidence, a strong sense of hope, and the North is pretty angry, definitely wanting revenge. The one thing going for the North, obviously, is the Navy and the naval blockade. That part of the Anaconda Plan has been more than successful. Ironclad warfare was something we talked briefly about last week. And again, here's just that picture that we left off with. So, back on land, because again, transitioning from discussing Navy warfare, the Union is going to capture Forts Henry and Donelson in February of 1862. So at this point, we're about a whole year into the war. This was a pretty big deal because it opened the door for General Grant to head south into Tennessee. Now, up next, we have the Battle of Shiloh. To size up the competition a little bit, the Union will have 30,000 men. Grant is marching south. Johnson will have 45,000 troops. Here's the deal. That obviously does not go well in our favor. They have 15,000 more men than we do. Not a good situation. General Buell, he has 50,000 men. They're trying to march west as fast as they can to join Grant's army. They know if they can combine their troops, they'll have 80,000 men, almost double of what Johnston has, and that is a surefire victory. The problem is getting those other 50,000 men there as soon as they can. Now, Johnston knows his best chance of recapturing Tennessee was to launch a surprise attack against Grant ASAP. So, looking at the Battle of Shiloh, your location obviously is Shiloh, Tennessee. The battle begins on the early morning of April 6th, 1862. The Confederacy will launch that surprise attack on Grant's men just like they had planned. The battle will last 2 days. So again, last 2 days, Johnston will be killed. The funny thing is that typically your generals don't die in battle. They don't. And Johnston, it's something silly. Like I think he gets shot in the leg accidentally, and it's not something that would have ever killed him, but it becomes, that's what ends his life because he doesn't take care of it and he ends up bleeding to death. Now, Buell's men do show up just in the nick of time. They help the Union regain strength and they push the enemy back into Mississippi. So again, our location is Shiloh, Tennessee. There's our date, April 6th, 1862. And the winner, if the South is having to retreat, the winner of this battle is the North. Now, we are going to see approximately 23,746 men die. Of those, 13,000 of them are Union soldiers. So we're going to have a little bit of a heavier loss than this Confederacy, but we will still win the Battle of Shiloh. So why is this battle so important? It will allow the Union to gain control of the Mississippi River Valley. You can go ahead and hit pause if you need more time to write, but I will continue moving on to the next slide. So with the Battle of Shiloh, something important to remember is that, again, if we're trying to gain control of the Mississippi River Valley, we're trying to put into action that second part of the Anaconda Plan by splitting the South in two. This will allow us to gain part of the northern half of the Mississippi River Valley, but the southern half still needs to come into Union control. Eventually, we will see the fall of New Orleans. So again, because of the Battle of Shiloh, we capture this northern part, and the fall of New Orleans will at least allow us to start working our way north. This is not a part of your notes. It happens April 25th, so about 3 weeks after the Battle of Shiloh, we will capture the southern port of New Orleans. Again, we are on our way to achieving the goal of splitting the Confederacy in two. The last big thing we need to see happen, obviously, is that capture of Richmond. And that leads us to the 7 Days Battle. So after the fall of New Orleans, McClellan will start advancing towards the capital of Richmond, Virginia. For the 7 days battle, Richmond, Virginia is your location. Robert E. Lee will have taken control of the Confederate troops, and he's actually going to send a spy to locate McClellan's position and attack the Union Army. The attack will happen from June to July of 1862. So again, for the 7 days battle, we have Richmond, Virginia, and then for date, it's June to July of 1862, right there on the bottom. The two sides will fight for a week, again, hence the name. We don't get too crazy with our names here in history. The Confederacy will suffer a heavier loss, but the Union is forced to retreat from the Confederate capital of Richmond. What's underlined there is why it is important. So if the Union is forced to retreat, that means that the South wins. So again, with the 7 days battle, it is happening right outside of Richmond, Virginia, June to July of 1862. Because the Union is forced to retreat, the South wins. And again, what's underlined is why it's important. George McClellan really starts to get the bad rap with this battle. To have the South suffer more losses, but for us to not come out as the winners does not bode well for him. He didn't quite stick the battle out to the very end. A lot of people say he jumped the gun by retreating a little bit too soon. And from here on out, it's just going to be loads of problems for George McClellan, and especially his relationship with Abraham Lincoln. Prisoner camps were something I mentioned briefly last week. There's 15 of them throughout the United States. So Elmira Prison Camp is actually located in New York. I'm not going to go through all of them, just a handful. This particular camp housed about 12,000 Confederate soldiers, but only had room for 5,000. So they're at almost 3 times the capacity. You can see your men here. Okay, again, where the men are living. There's another picture. I mentioned it last week and I'll say it again. It oddly reminds me of a concentration camp, although they're not doing like mass killings and things like that. It's very different what was going on in these camps, but it still gives you that same eerie feeling and it looks quite similar. Camp Douglas is another one. This was actually a training facility before it was conformed to a prison camp. It has housed 18,000 soldiers. We are going to see over 4,200 men die here. And it was often said to be 80 acres of hell. So again, Camp Douglas, right outside of Chicago in 1864. This is a drawing of it. However, they will convert all of it from a training facility to a prison camp. Picture of it real quick. Andersonville. Andersonville is said to be America's Auschwitz. Auschwitz, if you know anything about concentration camps in World War II, Auschwitz was the most deadly. It had or witnessed the most death and atrocity for medical experiments and all sorts of things. This is also known as Camp Sumter in Georgia. It existed for only 14 months, but will house 45,000 Union troops. They're going to see 13,000 people die there. The commander of the camp, Captain Henry Wirz, was one of the few men that were actually executed for his Civil War crimes. He was just a terrible guy. Those 13,000 deaths, not all of them happened, because of lack of nutrition or things like that. Again, if he's being executed for war crimes, I'm going to let you piece together what could have happened to these men. The pictures that do exist of Andersonville aren't the greatest, but again, you can see all the little tents. Notice how it has the double ring, right? If you at least escape through the first wall, you'll be stuck and have to face another barricade. So prison camps during the Civil War were potentially more dangerous and more terrifying than the battles themselves. A soldier who survived his ordeal in a camp often bore those deep psychological scars and physical maladies that may or may not have healed in time. So again, long-lasting effects. We're going to see 56,000 men die in prison camps over the course of the war, and that accounted for roughly 10% of the war's total death toll. It exceeds the American combat losses in World War I, Korea, and Vietnam. So again, about 10% of the deaths within the Civil War will take place or occur within your prison camps. War continues. So, following the 7 days battle, Lincoln became frustrated and ordered General John Pope to march directly to Richmond from Washington, D.C. Jackson wanted to defeat Pope's men before they joined up with McClellan's larger army. So, again, everybody's trying to meet up. And this is where we will see the Second Battle of Bull Run. So, again, here's our men. We're hoping, or the South is hoping, to get both of their troops together to defeat the North. So the Second Battle of Bull Run. Jackson and Pope's men met on the battlefield in August of 1862. If you were looking for the location, you already know the location of Bull Run. It's in Virginia. So again, Virginia is your location. August 1862 is your date. The men will fight for 3 days outside of Manassas, Virginia, along Bull Run Creek. On the third day of battle, the Confederates forced the Union to retreat. So again, Jackson and Pope's men are going to duke it out. Things don't go well for the Union. We are forced to retreat from Bull Run for the second time. So the winner of this battle is the South. So why is it important? This victory will inspire Lee to take war to the north. If you haven't caught on, all of the major battles that we've looked at thus far have been fought in the South. And this is the first time where now the South is willing to, not have to sit and defend. They're going to get up and move and go see and track down these men and find them. They've had success. It's about time that they start attacking. That's kind of how they see it. So again, switching their approach to war. If you need more time, you can go ahead and hit pause. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving. Now, invading in the north. Riding the waves of success after the 7 days battle and the Second Battle of Bull Run, Lee decides to invade in the north. He wrote a letter to President Jefferson Davis about his plan, but did not wait for a response back, which you and I both know is a big uh-oh move. You don't do that. Now, some reasons for invading. Lee thought that victory in the north would force peace talks and the war could come to an end. He felt invasion would give Virginia farmers a rest from the war during harvest season. Again, we've been fighting a few battles within Virginia. The Confederates could steal from the North. The South is lacking resources. The blockade is working. They're slowly starting to become more desperate. Ultimately, General Lee hoped it would show that the Confederacy could win the war and have European nations decide with the South. We are going to see Lee lead 40,000 men into Maryland on September 1862. Lee will split his army in two and sends half to Harper's Ferry with Stonewall Jackson. And when Lee arrived in Maryland, he issued a warning trying to get the people of Maryland to join the Confederacy. So again, Battle of Antietam, we have our location there, Maryland, the date September 1862. Now, the two armies will meet along Antietam Creek in Maryland. The battle will last for hours, and by the end of the day, the Union Army had suffered more than 12,000 casualties. The Confederates endured about 13,000. In the end, Lee was pinned down at Antietam Creek by George McClellan, the only good thing he possibly ever did for the Union, and the Union forced Lee back into the South. So, again, Maryland is your location. September 1862 is your date. The winner, if if Lee is forced back to the South, the winner of Antietam is the North. Okay. And so why is it so important? Two reasons. First, it's the bloodiest day of the war, and it's what Lincoln needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. If you need to hit pause, go ahead and do so. There we see, again, photography with the Civil War. You don't typically take pictures of people who move, and so they, as a result, photograph the dead because the dead don't move. So a lot of the photographs we do have from the Civil War are a little gory. But this is following Antietam. And we have Lincoln there. Again, notice his height compared to the rest of the men. It's the big question. Was it a good idea for General Robert E. Lee to invade the North? Why or why not? Something we have to figure out. Now, for Lee to show up into Maryland and try to convince the people of Maryland to join the Confederacy, probably not a good idea. It seems a little seems a little obnoxious, and it obviously doesn't work for him. Now, upset by Lee's failed attempt to capture the North, the Union wanted to take firm control of the Mississippi and cut the Confederacy um, and cut off the Confederacy's trade with Europe. Now, before all that happens, Lincoln will issue the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. Some reasons for the EP. It was not to free the slaves, but to save the Union. That was the whole purpose of this. He even wrote a letter to Horace Greeley, the publisher of the New York Tribune, saying that his main objective in this struggle, the struggle being the Civil War, was to save the Union and is neither to destroy or save slavery. Despite that statement, the South still resented him so much. So again, the Emancipation Proclamation ultimately freed the slaves, but that was not Lincoln's intent or reason for putting this into action. So the result is the EP freed all slaves living in the states that had left the Union. Most former slaves worked as laborers or joined the Union military. The Emancipation Proclamation also hurt the South's hope of getting help from Britain and France because those two countries opposed slavery. If Britain and France oppose slavery and the South makes a big stink about slavery not existing anymore, they know that their friendship with those two countries will cease to exist. And so the South basically has no choice but to be quiet if they're going to get any kind of resources to continue with this war. Signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, following the Emancipation Proclamation, many freed African Americans will join the Union Army. While all white Northerners were not ready for this, they needed to accept their new comrades. Roughly 180,000 African American men served in the Union Army. They received $10 a month, while white soldiers received $13. Now, this is kind of our stopping point for the day. Something to make note of right there is that last bullet point. African American soldiers who are doing the exact same job, putting their lives on the line, doing nothing different than the white soldiers, are receiving less. There has been discrimination, whether it's gender or race or anything of that nature, since all of this started. If there weren't racist tendencies before the Civil War, we definitely create a divide immediately after African Americans are granted their freedom. This isn't the first time we're going to see it within history, particularly American history. And it's a battle that they'll continue to fight for another 100 years until the civil rights movement is put into action in the 50s and 60s. So again, just something to kind of make note of. Now, we are going to stop here for today. You have a quiz that you are going to complete. Actually, before you take your quiz, you are going to go read about the Emancipation Proclamation on page 29 of your packet. That page will also be posted in Google Classroom. You'll read about it. You'll take the short Emancipation Proclamation quiz, and then you will go look at your distance learning assignment, which is posted for you in Google Classroom. Please email me with any questions, and hopefully you will. I don't say hopefully. Unfortunately for you, you will have to hear my voice again probably on Monday and or Tuesday, depending on what group you are in. But best of luck with the rest of your week. Hope all is going well, and I definitely miss you guys. Take care.